How many times have you seen women on death row? We've talked about women on long sentences and even life sentences, but do you know there are a few women on death row? In today's video, we're going to walk through the lives of 10 women currently on death row in the United States, exploring their early years, the moments that changed everything, and what life looks like now behind bars. But before we begin, if you love true crime stories told with depth, accuracy, and respect, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive like this one. Now, let's start with our first case. Brenda Andrew, convicted in the 2001 for the killing of her husband and currently the only woman on Oklahoma's death row. Brenda Andrew was born and raised in Enid, Oklahoma, in a quiet, devout family known for kindness, humility, and faith. From childhood, she flourished in school and stood out in her community for her generosity, cooking for neighbors who were ill, walking beside those with Alzheimer's so they could stay connected to the world, and lovingly supporting a mentally impaired brother. In church, she taught Sunday school. In her final years at school, peers remembered her as the steady hand that held quirky family life together with warmth and care. At 21, Brenda married her high school boyfriend, Rob Andrew. They settled into married life quietly and comfortably. After college, she became a Sunday school teacher and a devoted full-time mother, cherishing their 2 young children. Rob worked in advertising and served as a deacon at their church. Their life seemed anchored by faith, education, and community spirit. But beneath this calm surface, the relationship had begun to fracture. Rob discovered that someone had tampered with his car's hydraulic brake lines cut so he might suffer a fatal accident. He suspected Brenda and her lover, James Pavitt, who also happened to be their life insurance agent. Brenda's name appeared on a forged ownership document for Rob's life insurance policy, preventing him from removing her as beneficiary. Rob filed a report and sensed danger, but tragedy was already in motion. Then came Thanksgiving morning, November 20th, 2001. Rob came to collect the children, as he often did. Brenda met him in the garage, telling him the pilot light needed fixing. Moments later, 2 gunshots echoed. Rob fell, fatally wounded. Brenda suffered only a superficial wound to her arm. Brenda dialed 911, claiming masked intruders had attacked them. Within days, she had fled to Mexico with Pavitt and their children. Fleeing did not afford them safety. They were arrested upon re-entry. Investigators later discovered a damage-laden trail, matching shotgun shells in the garage and a neighbor's house, a .22 caliber bullet in Pavitt's daughter's car, and evidence of the life insurance switch and forgery. Pavitt's daughter unwittingly helped provide crucial leads as she relayed overheard pleas from her father. In 2004, Brenda stood trial. The prosecution painted a narrative saturated with gendered stereotypes, an image at odds with the quiet mother who had once taught children about kindness. They showcased her intimate clothing, labeled her promiscuous and a bad mother, and paraded her thong underwear before the jury, proclaiming, "The grieving widow packs this to go sleep with her boyfriend?" A grieving widow doesn't pack her thong underwear and run off with her boyfriend. Judges in appeals noted the trial wound was sealed with injustice. Judge Arlene Johnson called it a pattern of introducing evidence that has no purpose other than to hammer home that Brenda Andrew is a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman. Though she found guilt persuasive, she insisted the death sentence was infected by prejudice. Still, the sentence stood. The jury convicted Brenda of first-degree murder and conspiracy, identifying 2 aggravating factors. The killing was for financial gain, and it was especially cruel. She was sentenced to death, the only woman ever to be held on Oklahoma's death row. Over the years, Brenda's case wound through the complex web of appeals. In federal courts, she argued that the sexist, prejudicial evidence had deprived her of a fair trial. The lower courts upheld the verdict, labeling the trial deeply flawed but legally permissible. Then came January 2025. The U.S. Supreme Court, by a 7-2 decision, reversed course. It ruled that the evidence about her sexual history and demeanor might have so poisoned impartiality that due process was under threat. The case was sent back to the 10th Circuit for re-examination. Inside the walls of the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center, Brenda's world is measured not by days but by routines. The segregated housing unit, where she spends most of her time, is a place of stillness broken only by the metallic clang of doors and the distant echo of correctional officers' footsteps. Her cell is small, just enough for a narrow bed, a metal sink, and a shelf stacked with worn paperbacks and legal documents she has read countless times. Prison life for a woman on death row is not the same as the general population. Brenda rarely interacts face-to-face with other inmates. Most conversations happen through steel bars or across a narrow slot in her door. She is allowed out of her cell for just an hour a day, usually for solitary exercise in a caged yard where the sky feels almost too wide after the dim light of her cell. Books have become her companions. She reads everything from historical novels to law books, always searching for hope hidden between the pages. Some days she sketches on scraps of paper, often drawing scenes from her childhood. The dirt roads of her hometown, the church where she once sang in the choir, the front porch where her grandmother would shell peas in the evening. Her meals are slid through a slot in the door, and though they are rarely memorable, they mark the rhythm of the day: breakfast at dawn, lunch just past midday, dinner before the sun sets. A small television bolted high on the wall streams limited programming, but for Brenda, it's less about entertainment and more about keeping track of a world that has long moved on without her. Letters are her lifeline. Though they arrive infrequently, Brenda treasures each one, folding and refolding them until the paper grows soft. She responds carefully, her handwriting neat and deliberate, pouring her thoughts into words she hopes will reach beyond these walls. Despite her isolation, she participates in whatever programs are allowed for death row inmates: Bible study sessions conducted through the bars, occasional visits from spiritual counselors, and meetings with her legal team. She has become accustomed to the steady rhythm of the prison's controlled environment. Yet, there is always an underlying awareness of the weight of her sentence. Even within these constraints, Brenda has found ways to keep a sense of self. She keeps her space tidy, aligns her books in order of size, and folds her clothes with precision. These small acts of control are her way of resisting the erasure of identity that prison life can bring. And yet, each day ends the same way: alone, under the hum of the overhead light, listening to the distant, muffled sounds of a place that never truly sleeps. In those quiet hours, she thinks about the road that brought her here and the long, uncertain path ahead. Number 2. Melissa Lucio, convicted in the 2007 for the death of her daughter. Melissa Lucio's story begins in a small, close-knit town in Texas, where she grew up surrounded by a large, loving family. From an early age, Melissa was known for her resilience and deep devotion to her children. Life was not always easy for her, marked by struggles and hardships that shaped the woman she became: a mother, fiercely protective and committed to her family. Raised in an environment where support was vital, Melissa balanced multiple jobs to provide for her children, often sacrificing her own comfort to ensure they were cared for. Despite the challenges, Melissa's life was rooted in the everyday rhythms of motherhood. She spent her days managing a household, caring for her children, and navigating the complexities of life in a community where neighbors knew one another by name. Her daughter, Mariah, was at the center of her world, a bright, energetic child whose presence brought light to even the darkest days. Melissa's love for Mariah was evident to those who knew them, a bond that seemed unbreakable. However, the family's stability was shaken in February 2007 when Mariah was found unresponsive and severely injured in their home. The emergency responders arrived to a scene that would spark a legal battle lasting years. Mariah was rushed to the hospital, but her injuries were grave. She had suffered multiple fractures and trauma consistent with abuse. Despite medical intervention, Mariah's life slipped away, leaving the community in shock and Melissa facing grave accusations. The investigation into Mariah's death was swift and intense. Authorities focused on Melissa, who was arrested and charged with capital murder. The prosecution's case painted a portrait of a negligent and abusive mother responsible for her daughter's fatal injuries. The trial that followed became a spotlight on the complexities of child abuse cases, the challenges of proving intent, and the devastating consequences of trauma within families. Melissa's defense argued that she was a victim of circumstance, overwhelmed by the difficulties of her environment and struggling to protect her children in the face of limited resources and support. Testimonies from family members and experts highlighted a history of hardship, pointing to alternative explanations for Mariah's injuries, including the possibility of accidental falls. They emphasized Melissa's efforts to seek medical help and her evident love for her daughter, challenging the narrative of malicious intent. Despite these arguments, the jury found Melissa guilty in 2008, sentencing her to death. The verdict ignited debates about the fairness of her trial. The role of socioeconomic factors in her conviction, and the broader implications for mothers accused of abuse in similar circumstances. Legal advocates and human rights groups rallied around her case, citing concerns over the evidence used and the treatment Melissa received during the judicial process. In the years that followed, Melissa's case underwent numerous appeals and reviews. New evidence emerged, including expert analyses suggesting that Mariah's injuries could have resulted from a fall down the stairs, a scenario consistent with Melissa's account. Advocates argued that key medical findings were overlooked or misinterpreted during the trial, raising questions about the reliability of the conviction. Today, Melissa remains on death row at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, her case continuing to evoke controversy and calls for justice reform. Her life in prison is marked by the isolation and constraints common to death row inmates. She endures the daily routine of confinement hours spent in a small cell, limited contact with others, and a constant engagement with legal proceedings aimed at overturning her sentence. Through it all, Melissa's story is one of endurance amid adversity. It highlights the challenges faced by women on death row, especially those whose lives are entwined with complex family dynamics and systemic issues. Her case continues to inspire discussions about the death penalty, the intersection of poverty and justice, and the need for compassionate examination of those accused under difficult circumstances. Melissa Lucio's journey from a devoted mother to a death row inmate is a stark reminder of the profound impact of the justice system on individuals and families. As her appeals move forward, the world watches, questioning not only the facts of the case but the broader principles of fairness and mercy that govern us all. Number 3. Tiffany Nicole Moss convicted for the 2013 starvation and death of her 10-year-old stepdaughter. Imani Moss and Georgia's only woman on death row. Tiffany Nicole Moss's story is one that lingers long after you hear it, a tragic narrative of a young girl's stolen childhood and a family shattered by neglect, abuse, and loss. Born and raised in Georgia, Tiffany's early years were marked by a modest upbringing in a working-class community, where family ties ran deep but struggles were never far away. Not much is publicly known about her childhood, but what emerged later in her life was a woman shaped by hardship, burdened with responsibility, and ultimately caught in circumstances that would lead to her downfall. Tiffany became a stepmother to Imani Moss, a bright and innocent 10-year-old whose life was filled with both promise and pain. Imani, despite her tender age, endured a world far harsher than any child should face. Neighbors described the little girl as quiet, withdrawn, and often hungry, her thin frame stark against the backdrop of a home that should have been a sanctuary. One neighbor later recalled, "I remember seeing her sitting on the porch, so thin, it was like you could count every bone. She never smiled. It was heartbreaking to watch." As the months passed, Imani's condition worsened. The child's fragile body bore signs of severe neglect, ribs visible beneath taut skin, broken bones in various stages of healing, and malnutrition so profound that medical experts would later call it one of the most severe cases they had ever seen. The emergency medical response to her condition was swift but ultimately futile. When Imani was found unresponsive in 2013, she was rushed to the hospital, where despite heroic efforts, she succumbed to starvation and the injuries she had endured. The investigation that followed painted a dark and unsettling picture. Authorities focused their attention on Tiffany Moss, who was charged with malice murder in the death of her stepdaughter. The prosecution argued that Tiffany's neglect was not accidental, but deliberate, a chilling portrayal of a woman who chose to withhold food and care from a child entrusted to her protection. During the trial, the prosecution's case was bolstered by disturbing testimony and hard evidence. Medical examiners testified about the extent of Imani's injuries, emphasizing the brutality of the neglect. "This was no accident," one forensic pathologist stated plainly. Imani's condition was consistent with prolonged starvation and repeated trauma. These injuries did not happen overnight. Prosecutors introduced photos of Imani's emaciated body, which many in the courtroom found difficult to witness but essential to understanding the gravity of the case. A prosecutor's statement during closing arguments lingered in the minds of many. Imani's voice was silenced, not by chance, but by a betrayal of trust. The person responsible for her care was the very person who let her suffer in silence. These words underscored the weight of the charges against Tiffany and set a somber tone for the jury's deliberations. Tiffany's defense team fought fiercely to challenge the prosecution's narrative. They presented a woman overwhelmed by life's challenges, grappling with personal struggles and a chaotic household environment. The defense argued that Tiffany was not a monster, but rather a woman lacking the resources and support necessary to provide adequate care. They highlighted the presence of other adults in the home, suggesting that responsibility for Imani's condition was shared and complex. One defense attorney implored the jury, "We ask you to look beyond the surface and consider the whole story, the struggles Tiffany faced, her own efforts to care for Imani, and the tragic circumstances that led to this heartbreaking loss." They introduced testimony from family members who spoke of Tiffany's love for her stepdaughter and her attempts to protect her. Yet, despite these efforts, the jury was convinced by the prosecution's case. In 2015, Tiffany Nicole Moss was convicted of malice murder, sentenced to death, and became Georgia's only woman on death row. The verdict sent shockwaves through the state and ignited fierce debates about child welfare, the death penalty, and the responsibilities of caretakers in vulnerable families. Since that day, Tiffany has lived confined within the walls of the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, navigating the harsh realities of death row life. Her daily existence is confined to a small, stark cell-bare walls, a narrow bed, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Time moves slowly here, each day a repetition of routines. Meals delivered through a slot in the door, limited opportunities for exercise, and brief interactions with guards or visitors. Despite the isolation, Tiffany's resolve has not broken. She engages with her legal team regularly, seeking every possible avenue for appeal. In letters made public by her defense, she has written with a tone of deep remorse and yearning for redemption. "I carry the weight of Imani's death every day. I never wanted her to suffer. I want the chance to prove my innocence and make amends." Her appeals have brought to light new evidence and expert opinions that challenge aspects of the original trial. One recent report questioned the thoroughness of the medical examinations and suggested alternative explanations for some injuries. Her lawyers argue that mental health evaluations were insufficiently considered, and that Tiffany's chaotic environment and possible coercion by others were overlooked. These arguments are currently being reviewed by higher courts, leaving Tiffany's fate suspended in uncertainty. The story of Tiffany Nicole Moss raises profound questions about justice and mercy, accountability, and the intersection of poverty, mental health, and the law. It forces society to confront the complexities behind tragic deaths like Imani's, where victim, accused, and circumstances intertwine in painful ways. Tiffany's case continues to be a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the urgent need for compassion in the criminal justice system. As the years pass, the voices calling for her case to be re-examined grow louder, advocating for a more nuanced understanding of the woman behind the conviction and the child whose life was so tragically cut short. If you are still watching, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a deep dive like this one. Let's continue. Number 4. Blanche Taylor Moore, convicted of poisoning in a 1986 murder. Blanche Taylor Moore was a woman who seemed, at first glance, to embody the charm and grace of a Southern belle. Born in the mid-1930s, she grew up in a small North Carolina town, where smiles were currency and appearances could make or break reputations. Blanche was known for her warmth in church circles, her involvement in the community, and her ability to light up a room with laughter. But beneath that genteel facade lay a darkness that would shock an entire state and send a ripple of fear through anyone who knew her. Her life was marked by a series of mysterious tragedies, beginning with the sudden death of her first husband, James Taylor. In 1973, the cause was ruled natural, but whispers followed Blanche, whispers of a woman who had the power to harm without ever raising a hand. As the years passed, more people close to her began to fall ill under suspicious circumstances. Her father, P.D. Kaiser, succumbed to unexplained ailments. Her boyfriend at the time, Raymond Reed, died in agony with symptoms no doctor could explain. No one suspected the truth until 1986, when Reverend Dwight Moore, Blanche's fiancé, was struck by a debilitating illness. At first, doctors thought it was a stomach virus. But the symptoms grew stranger: violent vomiting, severe abdominal pain, hair loss, numbness in his limbs. It was as if something invisible was slowly eating him alive. When toxicology reports revealed arsenic poisoning, the shockwaves hit the town like a thunderclap. This was no accident. The discovery set off an intense investigation that turned Blanche from beloved community member to prime suspect. Detectives meticulously exhumed the bodies of those who had died around her, uncovering horrifying proof. Each corpse showed lethal levels of arsenic, the same poison that had nearly killed Dwight Moore. The realization dawned. Blanche Taylor Moore had been poisoning those closest to her, one by one, with silent, deadly precision. The evidence was damning. Arsenic was found hidden in her home, concealed in innocuous containers, waiting to be slipped into meals or drinks. Neighbors recalled the eerie normalcy of her life. She cooked dinner, taught Sunday school, and smiled at church all while orchestrating a series of murders that played out like a dark symphony of death. In court, Blanche's cold composure was unsettling. She sat poised and polished, a stark contrast to the gruesome details unfolding before the jury. Prosecutors painted a portrait of a calculating killer who weaponized patience and poison to control her world. This wasn't a crime of passion, a prosecutor said firmly. This was a deliberate, prolonged attack. A woman who smiled while her victims suffered unimaginable pain. Medical experts testified to the harrowing effects of arsenic poisoning: agonizing stomach cramps, relentless vomiting, hair falling out in clumps, and a slow, merciless shutdown of the nervous system. One doctor described it as a living death. The jury was shown photographs of the victims, pale, emaciated, broken before their final breath. Defense attorneys fought to humanize Blanche, arguing the arsenic could have come from environmental sources or accidental contamination. They portrayed her as a troubled woman, struggling with mental health issues and unfairly targeted by a community desperate for answers. But the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Blanche Taylor Moore guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to death, a sentence that shocked many but felt inevitable given the evidence. Blanche became one of North Carolina's few women on death row, her life now confined to the stark, cold cells of Central Prison in Raleigh. Behind those walls, Blanche remains a figure of mystery and fear. She refuses to speak about the crimes she was convicted of, maintaining her innocence even as the decades pass. Her presence on death row is a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most familiar faces, that a killer's weapon need not be visible to be deadly. What haunts many is the possibility that Blanche's poison may have claimed more victims' silent deaths that were never investigated. The question lingers: how many meals did she prepare that became a sentence? How many trusted her smile, never knowing it concealed a lethal secret? The story of Blanche Taylor Moore is a dark testament to the hidden dangers lurking in ordinary lives. It challenges us to look beyond appearances and remember that sometimes, the deadliest weapons are those we cannot see, slipped quietly into our lives, sip by sip. Number 5. Darlie Routier, convicted in the 1996 murder of her sons. What will make a woman slay her 2 children and claim it was an intruder? She even went as far as hurting herself as well. Let us uncover this gruesome story. In the quiet suburb of Rolette, Texas, life for the Routier family once looked like a scene from an ideal American home. A loving couple with 3 young boys, laughter echoing through the rooms, and the promise of a bright future. Darlie Lynn Routier, the mother at the center of this story, was known among neighbors as a caring woman, someone who baked cookies, cheered at school events, and seemed devoted to her children. But beneath the surface, the Routier family's story would unravel in a way no one expected. It was a warm night on June 6, 1996, when the nightmare began. Darlie had gone to bed early in the living room with her 2 youngest sons, Damon and Devin, after an afternoon at the pool. The eldest child, Drake, slept in his own room. At around 1 a.m., a scream tore through the quiet house. Neighbors called the police after hearing frantic shouting and cries. When officers arrived, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. 2 boys lay battered and bleeding. Damon, just 5 years old, had been slashed multiple times across the neck and chest. He was dead. Devin, 6 years old, was still alive but in critical condition, covered in deep wounds. Darlie herself was injured, her throat slit, but she was conscious and insisting she had fought off an intruder. In her own shaky voice, recorded in a 911 call, Darlie said, "He came into the house. Somebody came into the house. My kids, they're hurt. They're hurt real bad." Paramedics rushed Devin to the hospital, but despite efforts, he died days later. The community was shattered. A mother wounded, 2 boys murdered in their own home. It seemed unfathomable. But as police investigated, cracks appeared in the story. No forced entry was found anywhere in the home. Windows were locked. Doors were secure. How had an intruder gotten in without breaking anything? Officers searched the garage window, which was found cut, but fibers matching the kitchen knife were on the torn screen, suggesting something else entirely. Blood spatter patterns on the walls and floors told a complex tale. Crime scene experts testified at trial that the blood distribution did not align with Darlie's claim of an attack by an outsider. And there was another unsettling detail. A neighbor had heard no sounds of breaking or forced entry. No signs of a struggle beyond the children's rooms. The investigation turned inward, with suspicion falling on Darlie herself. The trial, held in 1997, became a media frenzy. Cameras swarmed the courthouse as the state laid out its case against Darlie Routier, painting her as a cold, calculating woman who killed her sons for money. Prosecutors argued that Darlie was drowning in debt and desperate to cash in on insurance policies. They presented the fact that she had taken out life insurance on the boys not long before their deaths as evidence of motive. But perhaps the most damaging moment came from the footage of the birthday party held just 8 days after Devon's death, a graveside celebration caught on video, where Darlie was seen smiling and spraying silly string over the boys' graves. District Attorney Chuck Burkhead addressed the jury with pointed intensity. A grieving mother does not celebrate her dead children's birthdays with laughter and games. This woman showed a chilling lack of remorse. The defense countered fiercely, arguing that Darlie was traumatized and coping with grief in her own way. Psychologists testified about the unpredictable nature of grief and how individuals process loss differently. Her defense attorney stated, "My client is a mother who loves her children. She was fighting for her life and theirs that night. There is no evidence that proves she committed this horrific crime." Expert witnesses presented complex analyses of the blood spatter and wound patterns. Dr. Frederick Smithy, a forensic pathologist, testified that the wounds were consistent with a single attacker but did not conclusively prove who wielded the knife. Despite this, the jury found the circumstantial evidence compelling. The kitchen knife with Darlie's fingerprints was the murder weapon. The cut on her arm was argued to be self-inflicted, and the lack of forced entry raised serious doubts about her story. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Darlie of capital murder. The conviction devastated many who believed Darlie was innocent or, at minimum, deserving of a fairer trial. Over the years, a movement of supporters, advocates, and independent investigators have continued to question the verdict. Documentaries, books, and podcasts have re-examined the case, spotlighting alleged flaws in the forensic analysis and trial procedure. Some experts have pointed out that the blood spatter analysis used was controversial and disputed within the forensic community. Additionally, new witnesses have come forward, claiming to have seen suspicious activity in the neighborhood on the night of the murders, which was not thoroughly investigated. Darlie's defense team has filed multiple appeals, focusing on these new findings and alleged prosecutorial misconduct. For more than 2 decades, Darlie Routier has lived inside the walls of the Mountain View Unit, Texas's primary death row facility for women. Her days are regimented and solitary. Limited visits, sparse contact with other inmates, and the constant awareness of her sentence weigh heavily on her spirit. In rare letters, she has spoken of hope and faith, writing, "I believe someday the truth will come to light. I pray for justice not just for me, but for my boys." Despite the weight of her conviction, she maintains her innocence, a conviction that fuels a steady stream of appeals and advocacy from supporters worldwide. Darlie Routier's case remains a haunting mystery. Was she truly guilty of a crime so brutal it shattered a family and stunned a community? Or was she a grieving mother, wrongfully convicted amid flawed evidence and a rush to judgment? The lingering doubts, the conflicting evidence, and the heartbreaking loss of 2 young lives make this story a profound example of how justice and tragedy can intertwine in devastating ways. These are just the first 5 women whose lives took dark and tragic turns, stories that force us to look closer at the human side of death row. From Brenda Andrew's tangled tale of love and betrayal, to Melissa Lucio's controversial conviction, Tiffany Moss's harrowing case of neglect, Blanche Taylor Moore's silent poisonings, and Darlie Routier's heartbreaking family tragedy, each story is as complex as it is haunting. In Part 2, we'll continue exploring the lives of more women currently awaiting execution in the United States. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on your notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments because these stories will stay with you long after the video ends.